Have you ever wondered how one small act of kindness could change your life forever? What if I told you that offering a simple glass of water on a scorching summer day could lead to one of the most extraordinary moments you'd ever experience? Stay with me until the end to discover how a spontaneous decision I made from my front porch transformed not just my life, but an entire community. Welcome to Honor Echoes, where we share powerful stories of veterans and the unexpected moments that connect military service with civilian life. Before we dive into today's remarkable story, make sure to subscribe to our channel to never miss these touching accounts of honor, sacrifice, and the beautiful human connections that emerge from military service. It was the hottest day of the summer in my small town of Millfield, Virginia. The kind of day where the air feels like it's being pumped from a furnace, and the humidity wraps around you like a damp blanket. I remember checking the thermometer on my porch that morning, 98 degrees, and it wasn't even noon yet. I had just moved to Millfield 3 months earlier. At 67 years old, I'd decided to retire to this quiet town after my husband James passed away. He'd been a Vietnam veteran, proud of his service despite the challenges he faced when he returned home. After 42 years of marriage, I found myself alone for the first time, in a new place where I barely knew anyone. That Saturday, I was sitting on my front porch with nothing but my thoughts and a pitcher of ice water. My little house sat on Maple Street, which happened to be on the route for the annual summer training march of the nearby military base. I'd heard about these marches from my neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, but I hadn't witnessed one myself. Around 1 o'clock, I spotted them in the distance, a unit of about 30 soldiers in full gear, marching in perfect formation despite the oppressive heat. Their uniforms were dark with sweat, and even from my porch, I could see the strain on their faces. They moved like a single organism, steps synchronized, eyes forward, their determination cutting through the heat like a knife. I thought of James immediately. He used to tell me stories of marching for miles in the Vietnamese heat, carrying packs that weighed almost as much as I did. The worst part wasn't the weight, he'd say it was the thirst. You'd give anything for just one sip of cold water. As the unit approached my house, a decision formed in my mind almost without conscious thought. I grabbed my pitcher of ice water, a stack of paper cups I had left over from a church function, and hurried down to the edge of my yard. The young officer leading the unit noticed me standing there and gave me a curious look. I held up the pitcher. "Would your soldiers like some cold water?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the summer air. "It's awfully hot today." The officer hesitated for just a moment, then nodded sharply. 10-minute break, he called, and the formation came to a halt right in front of my house. What happened next still brings tears to my eyes when I think about it. Those young men and women, some couldn't have been older than 20, lined up politely at my little makeshift water station. Each one thanked me as I poured, some with just a nod and grateful eyes, others with words that carried the weight of genuine relief. "Ma'am, you're a lifesaver," said one young woman, her face flushed from exertion. "My grandma would do something like this," said another soldier with a slight southern drawl. "Reminds me of home." I learned later that their unit, Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, was on the final leg of a 15-mile training march. They'd been moving for over 4 hours in that brutal heat, with another 3 miles to go before reaching their destination. As they prepared to continue their march, the commanding officer approached me. His name tag read Wilson. "Ma'am, thank you for your kindness," he said, extending his hand. "Captain David Wilson." "Eleanor Matthews," I replied, shaking his hand. "It's nothing, really. My husband was Army Vietnam. I know how much a little comfort can mean." Something shifted in Captain Wilson's expression. A recognition, perhaps. "Was your husband James Matthews by any chance? 173rd Airborne?" The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. "Yes," I said, stunned. "How did you?" Captain Wilson smiled. "My father served with a James Matthews SL's tall guy, always carried a worn-out copy of The Old Man and the Sea in his pack. That was my James. All right. He'd read that book so many times the pages were held together more by memory than binding." "Your father was Bill Wilson, the radio operator?" I asked, remembering the stories James had told me about the man who saved his life during an ambush outside Saigon. Captain Wilson nodded, his eyes wide with surprise. Yes, ma'am. He passed 5 years ago, but he spoke of your husband often. Said he was the bravest man he ever knew. The coincidence was almost too much to believe. Here I was, new in town, feeling more alone than I ever had, and suddenly I was connected to this young captain through the shared history of our loved ones. Before they continued their march, Captain Wilson took my address and promised to visit again, to share stories about our families. I watched them march away, the encounter leaving me with a strange mixture of melancholy and hope. I didn't expect anything to come of it. Maybe a visit from the young captain someday, if he remembered. What I certainly didn't expect was what happened the following weekend. It was early Sunday morning when I first heard it, the distant sound of a marching band. In my bathrobe, coffee in hand, I stepped onto my porch, confused. There weren't any parades scheduled that I knew of. The music grew louder, and then I saw them turning onto Maple Street, the full regimental band of the base, in dress uniforms, brass instruments gleaming in the morning sun. Behind them marched Charlie Company, not in training gear this time, but in their service uniforms, sharp and pristine. Neighbors began emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Calloway from next door hurried over to stand beside me. "Eleanor, what in the world?" she began, but her question died as the procession came to a halt directly in front of my house. Captain Wilson stepped forward, accompanied by an older man with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons. A colonel, I realized. "Mrs. Matthews," Captain Wilson called out. "Charlie Company requested special permission to thank you properly for your kindness last weekend." The colonel stepped forward then. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm Colonel Harrison. When Captain Wilson told me about your act of kindness and the connection between your late husband and the captain's father, I knew we had to do something special. Your husband's unit, the 173rd Airborne, was known as the Sky Soldiers, and they embodied the values we still hold dear today: courage, sacrifice, and compassion." He turned and nodded to the band leader, who raised his baton. The band began to play America the Beautiful, the notes soaring clear and true in the morning air. "This is our way of honoring not just your kindness to our soldiers," the colonel continued when the music ended, "but also your husband's service and sacrifice. In the military, we never forget our own." Then, to my complete shock, the entire company rendered a salute to me, a simple widow who had done nothing more remarkable than offer water on a hot day. I stood there on my porch steps, tears streaming down my face, as neighbors gathered around. For the first time since moving to Millfield, I didn't feel like a stranger anymore. What happened next turned that Sunday into something the town still talks about today. The colonel announced that the band and company would be marching through town and invited everyone to join them. It was spontaneous and unplanned, a parade that formed organically as more and more townspeople joined in. Mrs. Calloway linked her arm through mine. "Come on, Eleanor, this parade is for you." So I found myself walking alongside Captain Wilson and Colonel Harrison, leading an impromptu parade through the streets of Millfield. Children ran alongside the soldiers, neighbors waved from porches, and the band played marching tunes that echoed between the buildings. As we walked, Captain Wilson told me more about his father, and the debt he felt his family owed to my James. "Dad was pinned down during that ambush," he said. "Radio destroyed, no way to call for help. Your husband crawled across 50 yards of open ground under heavy fire to reach him. Dragged him back to safety with a bullet in his own leg. Dad said he never understood true courage until that moment." I had heard this story from James, of course, but he'd told it differently. In his version, he'd simply done what anyone would do for a friend. Hearing it from the son of the man he'd saved gave it new meaning. When we reached the town square, the colonel had another surprise. He presented me with a shadow box containing a 173rd Airborne patch and a commendation that had been awarded to James that I'd never known about, a Bronze Star for valor during that very ambush. "We found this in our records," Colonel Harrison explained. "It seems your husband never claimed this medal. Many of that generation didn't. They felt they were just doing their duty. I ran my fingers over the medal, thinking of my humble James, who had never mentioned this honor. It was just like him to consider his actions, nothing special. The impromptu parade ended with a community picnic in the town park. Soldiers mingled with townspeople, sharing stories and building connections. I was introduced to so many people that day that my head was spinning. Town council members, the mayor, business owners, and families who had lived in Millfield for generations. One elderly gentleman approached me with tears in his eyes. He introduced himself as Frank Miller, a Vietnam veteran who had served in a different unit than James. "What these young soldiers did today," he said, gesturing to the members of Charlie Company. "This is the welcome home that many of us never got. Thank you for giving them a chance to do this, not just for you, but for themselves. For all of us." I hadn't thought of it that way, but I understood what he meant. The Vietnam era had left scars on our nation that still hadn't fully healed. Perhaps this small ceremony was helping to heal those wounds in some small way. As the afternoon wore on, Captain Wilson introduced me to the members of his unit individually. I learned their names, where they were from, and a little bit about each of them. There was Specialist Rodriguez from New Mexico, whose grandmother had taught him that no act of kindness is ever wasted. Private Chen from California, who was the first in his family to serve in the U.S. military. Sergeant Miller, a young woman from Kentucky who had joined the Army to pay for medical school. They weren't just uniforms anymore, they were individuals with stories, dreams, and futures ahead of them. Just like my James had been, all those years ago. As the sun began to set and the gathering wound down, Colonel Harrison approached me one last time. "Mrs. Matthews, there's one more thing. The base hosts a family day each month for the relatives of our soldiers. Many of our troops don't have family nearby. We'd be honored if you would consider being an honorary grandmother for some of these young people. Sometimes all they need is someone who cares enough to listen." I didn't hesitate. "I'd be delighted, Colonel." That was 3 years ago. Since then, my little house on Maple Street has become a regular stop for soldiers from the base. Sometimes they come for advice or a sympathetic ear. Sometimes they come to help with yard work or home repairs. Most often they come for Sunday dinner and a few hours of feeling like they're part of a family. Last Christmas, I had 14 grandchildren in uniform crowded around my dining room table. Captain Wilson, now Major Wilson, still visits regularly, bringing news from his father's old Army buddies and more stories about James that I'd never heard. And every summer, when Charlie Company does their training march down Maple Street, I'm waiting with cold water and cookies. It's become a tradition now, with other neighbors joining in, setting up their own water stations along the route. What began as a simple act of kindness, offering water to thirsty soldiers on a hot day, has blossomed into something I never could have imagined. A new family, a new purpose, and a community that has embraced me as one of their own. I often think about how close I came to not acting that day. How easy it would have been to simply watch those soldiers march past, thinking someone else would help if they really needed it. How different my life would be now if I had let that moment pass. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the most profound changes. A glass of water on a hot day. A parade on a Sunday morning. A family formed not from blood, but from compassion and shared respect for service and sacrifice. And I think James would be proud. Not of me, necessarily, but of these young men and women who carry forward the values he held dear: duty, honor, and the simple human kindness that can bridge any divide. That's the power of one simple act of kindness. It can ripple outward in ways we never expect, creating connections that transcend generations and heal old wounds. My journey from a lonely widow to the grandmother of an entire military company began with nothing more than a pitcher of water and the memory of my husband's service. What small act of kindness might change your life? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced how a simple gesture transformed into something much greater? Share your story with our community. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to Honor Echoes. for more powerful stories of veterans and the unexpected moments that connect military service with civilian life. Each subscription helps us continue to honor those who served and the communities that support them. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the most significant changes begin with the smallest acts of compassion. Until next time.